Come to our ranch. A ranch? There's food, drugs, and Charlie. Who's Charlie? Charlie is everything.
Charlie Manson is our miracle.
There will be blood on these hands.
I know everyone thinks we're these scary creatures who committed these horrible crimes, but we did what we had to do.
Good morning, ladies. I'd like you to meet Carlene Faith.
Hi, Carlene.
What is it you can really do for them?
I just want to remind them of who they were before they ever met Charles Manson.
On a True podcast, the podcast where we look at how Hollywood talks about true crime and the world of Los Angeles. As always, I'm Kristen, joined by the amazing Kim Pierce. Kim, how are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing good. We are continuing to chug along in our true crime summer series. We started with looking at 2003's Wonderland and the Laurel Canyon murders. We've talked about dueling versions of the Black Dahlia, and all August, we are looking at probably the most infamous crime to ever take place in the City of Angels, the Manson killings. And we already did our first episode looking at the different versions and depictions of Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter, but now we're going to start looking at how Hollywood has portrayed the Manson girls, the various young women that Charles Manson lived with, seduced, controlled, depending on which version you're watching. Those three things can either be in unison or it might just be one or the other. But we are starting things off by talking about the Lifetime original movie from 2016, Manson's Lost Girls, as well as the 2018 Mary Harron, Guinevere Turner feature, Charlie Says. But just to remind everybody, if you enjoy what we've been doing this summer, please consider continuing to support us on Patreon and tell your friends about us. Leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts. If you have friends that are into old Hollywood, classic film, TCM, true crime, female created content, let them know we're out there and tell them about our Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. We also have our Twitter at ticklish_biz. You can search for our YouTube channel, and we have an Instagram. So help us out, help us keep the lights on, and help us continue to make really fun podcasts like our True Crime Summer. So we are talking about the Manson girls in these two movies, and oh, what a tangled web Hollywood has weaved for them.
Oh boy.
You know, the Manson women, I think the fact that, we still call them Manson girls says a lot about the way that misogyny and paternalism has really kind of shaped them as people and as women in this society. Watching both of these movies really just reminded me of how film sees women through a certain lens, especially women who have committed crime.
I would agree. Two films we're tackling today. One, I definitely saw that. We'll be getting into Charlie Says a bit later. I found that far more interesting to watch, and I think there's far more discussion to be had. But I mean, one of these, I can't remember if you said, Lifetime original movie, and that's what we're getting here. If you wanted to know how Lifetime saw Charles Manson and all that, it was a thing. I did not know it, but it was a thing.
You're getting what you pay for, all right. I will say, when we've talked about Helter Skelter, the two versions from 1976 and the early 2000s, the Manson women were definitely respective of their eras, right? So in 1976, they were wild-eyed, no backstory to them. We knew nothing about who they were. They were just mindless examples of Charlie Manson's harem, right? For lack of a better word.
They're drug teenagers. They
I don't even think they're drug
shells of humanity. They just kind of walk through insane. Definitely
shells. I don't even think they'd come off as teenagers in 1976 because they're played by women in their early to mid 20s. But in 2004, when we were talking about using Linda Kasabian as the representative for this story, which we're going to talk about because Linda Kasabian as a character returns in Manson's Lost Girls as the focal point. But even in that film, you got a little bit of backstory on Susan Atkins, but that was really it. Again, they were more examples of his control. They were pawns than full-fledged characters.
These women there's such a potential for fascinating backstories here. Manson's Lost Girls goes into, you see just a hint of Linda Kasabian's mom, that there's some life there, that there's some semblance of her existence beyond Charlie. We see her ex-husband. We know that she had a life outside of the family. But other than that, in each of these films, we've only ever seen at most a sobbing parent in jail. These women only exist to be used by Charlie when they were fully fledged humans with trauma. And I think one of these films does very well diving into the abuse and the trauma that leads them there and that ultimately keeps them there. But these films only want to use them for I'm going to use the word titillating, because I think it continues. We'll touch on that throughout the next few films. The titillating aspect of cheap and easy sex, free love, and, cute girls getting brainwashed.
We talked about a romanticization of the Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring story when we talked about Helter Skelter in the last episode. And I think there is this real attempt to, in certain regards, make these women stupid, especially in the concept of how did these women assume that, it was all peace and love? And it really, I think there is a generational element of showing that the hippie movement in the grander scheme of things was really just a way for guys to get laid and take advantage of dumb women who didn't really know what they wanted. And I think a lot of that is reflective of a second wave feminism. We've talked about in the 1980s, the real backlash against second wave feminism. And I think that it's real easy, depending on who's telling the story, to say, look at how dumb these girls were.
And I think we see that here. Mary Harron's film, Charlie Says, we finally have a film being tackled by a woman filmmaker. And personally, I think that was the first film we've seen that's touched on the cycle of abuse, the cycle of brainwashing, the racism. This is the first film where they haven't in some way either romanticized the free love, kind of hippie, free sex, free love movement, and wanted to turn these women into sex objects. Hippie sex objects just there to take off their clothes and be there at Charlie's beck and call. So as I was watching these films, I felt myself definitely seeing how a lot of these depictions are the results of somewhat the titillation of a male filmmaker. I don't want to use romanticism, but fetishization probably of this era in history. And at some level, do we want to say wish fulfillment? I mean, feels a little gross to have this conversation, but that's kind of where my head went, especially after watching Charlie Says.
We're going to have some gross conversations, I think, in this episode. So Manson's Lost Girls is a 2016 TV movie for Lifetime. It's one of their ripped from the headlines or beyond the headlines type of movie. It's directed by Leslie Libman, who is a female filmmaker as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Did not even think about that.
Directed by Leslie Libman, whose biggest claim to fame was the movie she did after this for Lifetime, which was the Britney Spears biopic, Britney Ever After, which I did see in 2017. And if you thought this movie looked cheap, that movie looked cheaper. And so I think it's fascinating to look at two female filmmakers and show how one of them is able to do something with this material. I think more importantly than having a female filmmaker behind the helm, Charlie Says is the only one that is written by a woman as well.
True.
So it's written by Guinevere Turner, and her and Mary Harron most famously had paired together on American Psycho. And they had also done The Notorious Betty Page, which is another great biopic about a vastly misunderstood woman. Whereas Manson's Lost Girls is credited to two male writers, Matthew Tabak and Stephen Cronish. And both of them are predominantly TV movie writers, particularly in the frightening women category that I call of movies that are aimed at reminding women that anybody you sleep with could be a potential murderer.
This episode is made possible thanks to the continued support of our lovely Patreon subscribers. If you'd like another way to support us, recommend us to anyone looking for classic entertainment goodness. You can also leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you aren't yet a subscriber, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/ticklishbiz for giveaways, early access, and lots more additional bonus content.